Philip Mulryne was born on the 1st of January 1978 in Northern Ireland. He began his career at Manchester United before playing 150 games for Norwich City and was also a Northern Ireland international football player.
One day I was playing for my local team and there was a number of men watching the game who represented some of the English football clubs, and after the game 2 men asked me would I go on trial as a young boy over to these clubs to become a footballer, to see if I could make it there. And being a huge Manchester United fan, the decision was already made, and so I went to Manchester in 1994 and turned professional at the age of 17. And then around 1998, at the age of 19, I was very fortunate I made it into the Manchester United first team. And it was a very successful year for Manchester United at that time. Training every day with people who were my heroes in a sense, you know, people like Roy Keane and David Beckham. And one specific memory that comes to mind would be my first game at Old Trafford in front of 75,000 people, and just the feeling of, first of all, the nervousness beforehand.
Philip, how are you doing?
Well, good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. It's great to see you. Thanks for making time to speak to us here in Shalom World. And we were talking a bit today about your life story, and I suppose particularly you're known best for your time as an international footballer and a footballer with Manchester United and Norwich City. But I suppose what would be really interesting, I think, for just to hear about really is that journey of faith, because, you know, these days we're so used to footballers having just incredible sort of lavish lives, and then kind of you're wondering how does a life of faith sit with that?
Yeah, it's kind of a journey really that began when I was a young boy. Really, growing up in Belfast, faith was very important, and it was instilled in me in the family home. But obviously, when I got to Manchester at the age of 16 in 1994 and embarked on that kind of footballer lifestyle, I kind of left the faith behind, just not by a conscious decision, but just drifting away. And that lasted right up until till about the age of 28. I had 6 years at Norwich after that. And then I suppose I got to the age of around 28 and grew kind of dissatisfied with the lifestyle. You know, not so much, I loved the game and the training and everything about it, but I suppose I exhausted like the trappings of the life outside of the game and found them quite shallow. And I don't know why that took so many years to come to realise that, but it really came to a head in 2008 when I was 28, and that led me to kind of revisit the question of faith and, you know, if this isn't making me happy or fulfilled, what is it that I'm lacking, you know? And I started to maybe speak to some people of faith then, and those people are little signposts for me back to possibly practicing myself again. Okay,
because that's really interesting when you think about it these days, and I know you work with young people and I work with young people. When you ask them what do they want, particularly for a lot of the guys, all they want to be footballers or they want to be famous, and they think this is the sort of thing that's going to bring them happiness. Yeah. And it's interesting from your experience, having had the opportunity to enjoy all of that. Yeah. Actually, there are deeper questions or deeper needs that we have.
Sure.
You know? What do you think some of those might be?
Well, I often in class with the students make the distinction between happiness or pleasure and happiness, you know? Because a lot of them want experiences, and obviously a Christian understanding of happiness is much deeper and at a much deeper joy at a spiritual level, and you're trying to distinguish, okay, what is it you want in life? And you're right, a lot of them, I want to make an impact in the world, I want to do this, I want to you know, be competent at what I do and so forth. But you're always trying to bring them possibly to a deeper level, and to their identity is very much caught up in what they do, what their career is going to be, instead of like who they are and their character. And so I'm always trying to just bring them, well, here was my experience of that. which was wonderful and absolutely blessed. But there's a new dimension there that I didn't realise that I'm trying to communicate to them about their faith and what I can bring to their life, you know.
And tell us, I suppose, what I'm kind of wondering is for a lot of your young people these days, it is a busy world, you know, and it's a loud world, and, you know, there is the pursuit of, you know, pleasure or money or whatever. How difficult is it to hear the voice of God in the midst of all that sound and fury that sometimes signifies very little indeed?
Yeah, I would say it's the biggest challenge, you know, because like in the football world, it's just constant. And then when you have your free time, obviously, the dangers of a footballer is you have a lot of free time, and then you can fall into all sorts of pitfalls and things like that. But I certainly see it with the students. Technology and the impact it's having on them with regards to faith is huge. They find it very difficult to be silent and still, and for even a small amount of time. And you know, any vocation, it's a call from God. It needs to be nourished in silence and in prayer. So with the students, I'm very much back to basics, back to the very fundamentals of trying to introduce them to a way of prayer that they can actually make this part of their daily routine, and then get on to the more substantial things after, you know. So it's the biggest challenges we have now, I think, with this generation.
So Philip, you were talking about on your journey of faith, there were different people who really had a profound impact, whether it was your sister or the captain of your team in Norwich. But maybe could you tell us a bit more about what was happening within yourself? What was going on for you, you know, that actually sparked this journey, and the things maybe that kind of strengthened you on the way? And were there any times maybe when you weren't too sure where you were going?
I suppose there was a constant kind of restlessness that was there, you know, even throughout my whole 20s. And then I made the big decision in 2008 that to go back to Belfast I had the idea of just going back for 6 months and reconnecting with my family and my old school friends, and just taking 6 months, a year out of the game. And at that stage, I was still very much exploring and starting to read, but I was nowhere near a regular prayer life or even Mass at that stage. And I came home, and within 2 weeks, my sister and her husband kind of had a two-pronged attack, you know. My sister invited me to a charismatic prayer group, and her husband invited me to join the Legion of Mary to work in a homeless shelter for alcoholic men in Belfast. And just over the course of those months, going to the prayer group, working in the shelter, obviously praying the rosary every night with the men, listening to their stories, learning about the Mass, and then meeting these wonderful people of faith in the prayer group, everything kind of changed. Things were happening inside I couldn't really explain, you know, and this sense of contentment and peace and that restlessness was stopping. And it happened so like constant over the course of those months. Like my friends from England, my footballer friends are ringing me saying, when are you coming back? Or what's happening with you? And I was saying, I don't really know. I'm just I'm not sure what's happening at the minute. And over the course of that 6 months to a year, I started going to Mass regular and then every day. And the whole time, it was really just taking over my life, and this sense of joy about it, discovering this absolutely new and very freshly. And then in the course of that time, I started to feel the attraction to a vocation. That came later, maybe about 8 months after being home.
Okay. And so there's something really within that whole work and prayer, you know, that wonderful tradition that we have in the church, that, you know, we're devoted to pastoral service, but we're also devoted to, as much as we can, a life of prayer wherever we find ourselves. Was there, you know, you spoke about kind of that journey of faith, you know. Yeah. Was there a moment when you realised there was no going back? That for that deeper sense of fulfilment, the only way was forward, and forward wasn't going back playing football. It was something else entirely.
I would say for those who are involved in the charismatic movement, I did the Life in the Spirit seminars, and there was a particular night at the end where a number of people prayed over me, and I just had this unbelievable sense of a presence around me, and even inside, just this like flooding me, you know. And I went to confession to a priest right away. Kind of, that was my first instinct, which is interesting, you know. There's just this overwhelming sense of God's presence. And I went to confession to a wonderful priest, and my whole life really was all there. And I came out and it was so new. And I remember going home that night and just lying in my bed, and just the next day I woke up and kind of everything just seemed so fresh, as if, you know, the most simplest of things that I would have gone unnoticed. You know, we're standing here with great nature and so forth, but even simple things like the singing of the birds, and it sounds quite sugary, I know, but I mean,
It's
but you know,
incredible.
everything was quite new, and a sense of seeing God's presence in lots of different ways. And I think that was the major point. There was no going back after that, because I had an unmistakable experience that convinced me really of God's love for me and His presence in my life. And it was at that point I suppose the following weeks I started to feel the attraction to a vocation during Mass. I would see the priest saying Mass, and I started to think about it. And
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And tell me then, obviously this is a huge change. How did people take the news?
Mixed views, A lot of my footballer friends, wouldn't have been practicing. A lot of them are not even Catholic. So the concepts of, going to Mass every day, or even later on contemplating a vocation, the celibacy and poverty and these different things, they couldn't understand it. But after going back to visit them in the summer, I get a few weeks off, and I still go and visit them in the summer. Then having conversations with them, they can see that there's a change in me for the good.
Yeah.
And even that's a witness in itself. And, in the last number of years, I've had wonderful opportunities and conversations with footballers about different things. And so even though they can't understand it fully, they can see that there's something there, definitely. And I think it's starting to provoke questions from within them,
But now if someone was to ask me, are you proud of your brother? With 100%, yes. I'm proud of the man that he's became. I'm proud that he, with the grace of God, that he said yes to God and turned away from everything that the world had to offer, and walk away from that, because he's richer today than he was when he played football and had all the material things, and that's all it was. It wasn't genuine. He had all the material things, and, that in itself is nothing compared to what God has given him. And that to me is what I see in him, is the peace and the contentment that he has, and the love, and that he sees now for the first time, from all this happened, he came to his senses and he sees everything for what it is.
So as I was saying earlier on, that I started to perceive this kind of attraction to a kind of vocation. I went to see the bishop and kind of decided to enter the diocesan seminary, and outlined that, I was kind of discerning this way of life, and although feeling called to religious life as well. And he was happy enough that I could discern that in seminary, And so I spent 2 years in Belfast in St Malachy Seminary, and then I did 1 year in Rome in theology. I went to the Gregorian in Rome University, and then lived in the Irish College for a year. And it was really came to a head then, really, that the attraction to religious life, and actually a little bit more self-knowledge of thinking, my whole life as a footballer was in community and around a group of men and in that environment. And I tended to flourish better in that kind of setting, and there were certain things about the religious life that I found very attractive. So it was just a process of trying to find, okay, what's the right congregation for me? At that stage, I desired a very deep prayer life, but at the same time, I didn't want to be completely, say, enclosed, like in a monastery or whatever. So I started to look at religious orders, and then, I suppose quite providentially in Rome, I came across the Dominicans in San Clemente in our church there in Rome, and got to know a few individual friars and learned about the order and the charism, and all the elements seemed to be there in what I was looking for, And also, lastly, I didn't want to have to leave Ireland to go maybe join a religious order elsewhere in a different country or whatever. There was something about me that I wanted to be part of, maybe what's going on in the church here in the future, and staying at home. And I looked around, and I knew some individual Dominicans, and it attracted me to that way of life, and made the decision in 2012 to change over.
Okay, so you encountered that real sense maybe of belonging.
Yeah.
The kind of this is the place, like you said, the word you used, flourish. I think that's a great word. And so when you entered the Dominican way of life, and there were a great bunch of men, what was that like? How did you get on there? Because obviously it's quite different from the diocesan experience.
Yeah, the life, we do our first year in the novitiate in Cork, and even though still in seminary, you still had very much ability to contact your friends and things like that. But the novitiate in Cork was quite strict in a sense. And I just remember the silence, you had so much time given over to prayer and to reading and study and so forth, because St. Dominic put an emphasis on study, not to be academics, but as a way of holiness, really, and to learning about the faith and communicating it. So there was a certain amount of detachment that had to take place there in the novitiate with my footballer friends in England and not having regular contact. And that was tough for the first few months. But the religious life, it's like I remember being described before, it's, like an ocean, or you just get caught up in it. And I found that in the number of months, it's the kind of the rhythm of the life just carries you along once you get used to the rhythm of the day. And, it's for those who've experienced, for yourself, it's kind of the same each day. And, that can be monotonous, or you can really enter into it and it carries you along. And next thing, the months were going past, and it was a wonderful year, really, to prepare you for then going on to do your theological studies,
And you did those in
Dublin, St. Saviour's in Dublin, yeah.
Okay, very good. And in some ways, quite a contrast, really, when you think about, as you mentioned, the structure of formation within the Dominicans, and then maybe your previous life when you were a footballer, and you were just talking about maybe kind of how different the experience was then.
Yeah.
But you found, maybe deep contentment and deep peace there.
Sure. There's a lot of similarities. They're not very apparent, but, like I alluded to one there about, okay, in football, you're involved in a team and you're pursuing one goal, and that's a common goal. And there's certain human interaction and skills that you have to acquire there of dealing with players and in a very competitive environment. Okay, in religious life, it's different. The goal is different, but there's the same dynamic, a group dynamic, that you have to set aside your own kind of personal pursuits for the greater good of the community, and also having a superior, like as a footballer, you have a manager. And so I suppose maybe obedience, in a sense, it's very, it's idealistic when you haven't really, as a student, you haven't really experienced the fullness of it in the sense of being ordained, you're sent somewhere and things like that. But even going through the sense of obedience, having a superior, wasn't difficult for me because I was used to that in my football life. And certainly the very disciplined way of life, kind of routine, structural way of your day kind of being laid out before you, was very much in keeping as well with my footballer kind of lifestyle when I was in training. Getting up early, eating the right things, looking after your body. Okay, I wasn't praying and living a religious life then, but there's certain elements to it that I think translated quite well into religious life.
And then maybe, I suppose I just think about your journey, and it's been, I suppose everyone's journey is extraordinary, but yours perhaps particularly so. For people today who were considering a calling or a vocation, and it can be religious life, it could be priesthood, it could be married life, it could be something else. What may be the insights that you've picked up along the way that you'd think, gosh, this is really good advice I'd love to pass on. This is something I'd really think we should share. What might that be?
I suppose to always start from the fundamental belief that, that God knows you better than anyone, and He knows what your gifts are. And if He is calling you to this way of life, this particular vocation, it's not only to do His work and to do His will, in a sense. This is where you will fully flourish and fully be who you were created to be. And therefore your happiness is tied into it also. That's not to say it's always going to be easy, but it's certain to trust in God that if He's called you to this is a special call, and He knows you. He knows, and this it'll be good for you, and also for the people that you'll minister to, but also to have a sense of courage. It's very difficult. We spoke about it earlier. For young people in this generation, the sense of commitment, the fear of making these long-term commitments, that can be very daunting. So it is a real sense of trust, a trust in the Lord, and also as well for young people, especially young people who are living a life of faith and they feel called. For me, just in recent years, sometimes I get the sense that there's an approach to discernment that can be sort of like, looking for unmistakable signs before I make a decision. Wanting God to really spell it out in many different ways, before you take that step. And as a Dominican, just reading back in St. Thomas Aquinas, some of the medieval writers, and their approach to vocation was very kind of simple, in a sense of the very attraction to this way of life is an indication that God is called, and that sometimes you don't know. sometimes you only know when you take the step. And then God's grace works with you through that process afterwards. And then you can say, okay, I'm finding this life agreeing with me, I'm flourishing here. That's a sign that you're there after you've taken the step. But lots of young people wait for the steps beforehand, before I'll take the decision.
And we don't get grace in advance.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would be great if we did, but
Sure.
it doesn't seem to be the way it works.
So really, fundamentally, just a sense of courage and trust, and to have just to step out and really believe that, if the Lord's called you, this is a wonderful grace,
So, Philip, we were speaking a little bit earlier about working with young people, and certainly when I deal with a lot of young men, when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, being a footballer is definitely fairly high up the list. And I'm just thinking, your experience, the things that you've done, the places you've been, the football that you've played, and the example that you give now as a Dominican. For our young people, how does that relate to them, and how does that speak to them, maybe as you being a role model for them in life?
I've seen that it's a way in with them right away, So here in the college, I coach the soccer team as well, so they see me out of the habit playing soccer, and they see me differently in that sense. And they do listen, and it does, which I'm blessed with. They do, because of what you've done, that you have a way in with them maybe that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But my main focus is, because not everyone's going to become a footballer, and like you said, so many of them have that dream, and very few make it. What is more important for me is their character, and telling them about the values that they that they should aspire to have, and their character of the person they want to be. Because again, a big temptation for this generation with the pressures of social media is to place all their identity in what they do. And what career they have, how they look, how other people perceive them. So a lot of the work for me and talking to them is, okay, just to become aware of who you are and in God's eyes and the gifts that you have, and shape that character through things, talking about the virtues and how you shape a good character. And this will ultimately be where you will be content in the future, irrespective of where you find yourself in what career or whatever. And it's character formation really, as well as human formation and religious formation, and all these different elements coming together to try and produce individuals who will be mature Christians who, have good values and are making an impact in the world, And that's my message really. My message is to them, is to include God in that equation. To do not think that, in my experience, I thought I could do it on my own, and I was perfecting myself, and I was a wonderful footballer and these different things, and through my effort and sacrifice and things like this. But ultimately, the realization became to me that God was working through the whole process, and He's the source of all our gifts, really, and to try and get them to realize that He's not in competition with them, and that He wants what's best for them as well. And those are the kind of messages that I try to communicate to them. When I was a young boy, I used to look up to soccer stars really as the stars of the world. And this is what the world teaches us, that celebrities and so forth are the real lights in the world and real people that we should look up to. But what our faith reminds us is that the Lord Jesus Christ is the true, real star of the world, and that all our gifts really come from Him. And what we're doing as sports people, if we're privileged to play on that stage and receive, I suppose, the adulation of supporters of different football teams and so forth, that glory is not for us alone. And if we take that glory for us alone, we cut ourselves off very much from the source of all our gifts, of the Lord who is the real star and the real light, not ourselves, but we reflect His glory by using our talents and the gifts that He has given each of us. And He is the real star for all of us. And us as Christians in the sporting world, as athletes, remember that, and constantly need to remember that the gifts that He has given us are for our use, to use for His greater glory, to bring other people not to ourselves, but to Him, who is the real star and light of the world.
We live in a media age, of course, an age in which we get almost all of our information either from television or from the internet. Probably less and less of our information is coming through the traditional print media. So in that context, in today's world, an undertaking like Shalom World is incredibly important, and the efforts to catechize and to evangelize through television and through the internet is incredibly important in the world today. And I'm happy to say that my experience of Shalom has been entirely positive, and I am very happy to encourage everyone who's working as part of Shalom World in their efforts to bring the Catholic faith to the world around us. And also I give my special blessing on all those who are involved in Shalom, all those who are watching Shalom, and all the future viewers of Shalom. So thank you, and God bless you.